Hello and welcome to the Collecting Heroes podcast. I'm your host JD, the collector of collectors, and this is the podcast where I interview pop culture collectors from around the world. And before I actually get into today's guest, I wanted to sort of give a thank you to everyone who's been listening to the podcast so far. This is episode 1 of season 2, and season 1 has gone great. I've been watching the followers go up on Spotify and Apple, so thank you to everyone. You know who you are if you're coming back and listening again. And for anyone new to the podcast, welcome, and hope you enjoy this day. Hope you enjoy listening to the episode, and we'll go back and listen to a few of those other interviews as well. The other thing I'd like to ask everyone, if they can, is to actually go in and on whatever podcast platform you're on, give it a like and a review, because all that stuff will help me to rank as one of the best collecting podcasts, which is what I'd like to do. I'd like to be the one podcast to rule them all, and in the fandom bind them. And with that, I think that's a pretty decent segue to my next guest, who his name is Brian from Seattle, is a Tolkien collector. So welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
I can.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, so as I said, thank you for joining me. Really keen to talk to you. We've got Rings of Power actually is about to drop, I think.
Oh
Not
yeah.
long after we record this.
We got about 30 days. I'm
Yeah.
very excited.
So it'll actually come out not long after this episode actually goes live. And we might talk about that a little bit later, because I'm excited to watch that TV show.
Yeah.
But one of the things I was talking to you about beforehand is that, I go through and I find all these different collectors to have on the show. And one of those ways that I find collectors is through looking through the types of fandom that I was a fan of growing up or that I'm familiar with. And eventually I'll be branching out from those to other fandoms as well. But Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, I don't think there's a person who listens to the podcast who won't have some sort of familiarity with him. This is the same question I ask everyone up front. Tell me a little bit about how you came to be a Tolkien fan, or Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, all of those, and how did you become to be a fan and become to be a collector?
Yeah. No, thanks for having me on the show. And I'm very excited to be here. And to share my fandom with you and for all your listeners. So how it all started out was back in middle school. I remember this like it was yesterday. My parents, we'd always watch movies over the weekend, sometimes on weekdays, and they said, "Hey, Brian, let's go for another movie night. We heard that this Lord of Rings movie is up, and there's a lot of buzz about it." At that time, there wasn't any internet or phone. It was through word of mouth and the newspapers, and
Yeah.
and so I'm like, okay, let's check it out. And then I was that kid who sat in the movie theaters, and after 3.5 hours, I was completely mind blown. I was a fandom of like the never ending story. I kind of like these epic battles. I've always liked Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so I love anything that's like battle centric, and I also like something that was epic. And I remember even watching The Hobbit as a cartoon, but I didn't know what cartoon it was. I think I caught it in the middle where I just remember there was a dragon and then there was an arrow that shot towards the scale, and I thought it was the most epic thing. I even watched like Conan and those things growing up. So when I watched Lord of the Rings, I felt like it was just a combination of everything I loved like into one movie. And I walked out and I was just like, wow, and disappointed that it just ended. Because at the end of the first movie, Frodo and Sam just looks onto Mordor and they're like, okay, we're gonna go on this journey with Gollum, and it directed by Peter Jackson. And I was like, what happens next? Is this it? And then having to walk out, and like, what's going on? Why are we leaving now? I need a pee so bad. I've been sitting there for 3.5 hours, like, and so I can hear the crowd saying, "Oh, I can't wait for part 2 and part 3." And I was like, "Oh, there's a part 2," because usually movies they weren't a trilogy back then, right?
That's right.
20 plus years ago, it was just one, movie, beginning to end. Of course, you had a trilogy, but within that movie, the story completed itself. That it was just like a cliffhanger, so it drove me crazy. So that's how my passion started, and basically I've been hooked for 20 plus years, and basically just a grown kid, still liking Lord of the Rings. Even at my age, at 30, 37, I'm still loving Lord of the Rings as if I was like back in, my teens. So
Well, that's the great thing about Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. His writings, they have traversed such a long expanse of time. Like it is, it's top of the fantasy pile. Like obviously, there's a lot of great fantasies out there, modern day fantasies like your Game of Thrones and your Harry
oh yeah.
Potters and everything as well. And then I think going back to I think Homer's The Odyssey. If you want to go really far back in terms of the earliest fantasies, that those sorts of things that might have actually inspired Tolkien as well. But it's one of those things that he's just been around for so long. I actually have some facts here that I was listening to a few different podcasts and doing some research before this episode as well. Tolkien passed away in 1973, so almost 50 years ago
Yeah.
now that he passed away, which is so crazy to think of that amount of time, and how much of a fandom he'd built up prior to even that happening. The Hobbit was actually published in September of 1937 as
Yeah.
well.
First.
So
Yeah.
almost 85 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And originally, actually, funnily enough, that's when I saw that the first publishing of that was only 1,500 copies, which
Yeah, that's why getting a copy of a first edition Hobbit is going to cost you an arm, a leg, a kidney, and a house.
I imagine so. Yeah, 1,500 copies, and apparently they sold out within a couple of months. It wasn't expecting it to be the kind of hit that it was at the time. But you go from 1,500 copies of The Hobbit to now 150 million copies of Lord of the Rings that have been sold worldwide in book form, and that's not including everyone who's gone out and watched the film and purchased the DVDs back when you had physical copies and things. So tell me a bit about your collection. So how did your collection start? So obviously we know how the fandom started. Was
Yeah.
this like did you start collecting things straight away when the movies came out? And
No,
that was
no,
it?
no. At that time I was going to college. It was just a fandom that I enjoyed over the movies. I didn't have any
Mhm,
collecting because I have a ton of hobbies.
mhm.
Um, I was into pets, and I was into going out with friends. So that was just something I just enjoyed on the downtime, and I had a lot of downtime. And so how it actually all started was just several years ago. It was actually fairly recent. So my wife and I um, went on a Europe trip, and I was in London quite often for work every quarter, and there was a time when okay, I would like to bring you, one of my work trips, and I can extend that out, and we can go Paris. And so
Okay,
we went
cool.
to Paris, and there was a comic book shop there. Walked right in, and there was just this entire wall of Lord of the Rings statues, which is from Weta Workshop, and I have never seen them before. I was never
Yes.
a collector of anything of statues. I was always into toys. So let me give you a background. I was always into. I loved toys, like GI Joe toys. I was actually into X-Men. X-Men was like my my first passion. You know those passions that you had as a kid but didn't necessarily carry on.
Yeah.
To some degree it did, but Lord of the Rings really stuck with me since experiencing that, and actually just it kept growing. However, like, so that kid in me was still there, and the passion of toys. And when I saw the statues, it brought like a combination of I love toys, I love figures, I love art with Lord of the Rings. When I saw like the Morgul Lord, when I saw Sauron, and I just saw a whole wall of them, I just asked, "What is this? And where did you get it? And when did this come out?" And then uh, we had like a whole laundry list of things to do in our an itinerary. It was cut short because I was there for like almost 2 hours. My wife was so furious. I'm like, I had to look at each one of them and take a picture. And so that's how it all started. well, to know that they existed, and it always stuck with me. And then when we got back to Seattle, which I live in Seattle, Washington, USA.
Yeah.
Um, she bought me Comic-Con tickets. So Comic-Con, if for those of you who don't know, it's a convention for comic goers. But
Yeah.
Comic-Con has grown to pop culture. It's not about comics anymore. It's about movies and whatnot. Ironically, our Comic Con has Weta Workshop as one of the vendors there every year.
Yes.
So they came, and when my wife surprised me with a ticket to go to a Comic Con, a 3-day Comic Con, she basically unleashed Pandora's box. So you see this my collection on Instagram. She credits herself, and oh my gosh, I can't believe this is what I started from that one ticket. I went to Comic Con. I saw those same statues that I saw in Paris, and I was like, okay, now I know you exist. Hi, my name is Brian, and to find out, do you sell this? Yes, it's available. Because at that time they weren't selling it. It was just
Yeah.
for display. And
Yeah.
the idea of spending $200 to $300 on a statue was just I unfathomable. Like I can't even come to grips with that of spending that amount of money on a collectible. I think even $50 for a toy was just crazy expensive.
Hmm.
But I think over time, $50 has definitely become quite accessible, especially for it's not accessible. I'm just saying that it's not as a bad of an amount as a seasoned collector as myself now. Now, it's just been growing and growing, visiting Comic Cons, and then I didn't know that there was this community online, and I've made so many good friends. And this is a great part of the internet is, um, I connected with a lot of people who have the same passion as I do, with the passion of art, Lord of the Rings, and toys in a way, but stagnant toys with a little art piece. And then finding out that there was this whole community, and having to find out there is also a small community here in Washington. So it just basically just yeah, it just fed the fire and fed the flame. And I've always wanted a man cave, and
Nice.
so instead of having like a sports man cave, it became my Lord of the Rings man cave, and I couldn't be happier, and I'm very
Yeah.
blessed. So
Yeah. I mean, well, I saw one of the nicknames I think you gave it to was your Hobbit hole, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. It's sometimes when life gets tough or stressful with work, I always come here, and this is my solitude, and it's a collection that I'm also very proud of, but yet also means a lot to me. And I've become attached to these characters, and how I've transitioned, all of these things is sometimes I've sold some, sometimes I've kept some and I traded some, but it was all the the headwind of, can I let a piece go?
Yeah.
And there was, when I started collecting, I collected 1/6 scale from Weta, because for me, Weta, they are the Valar are like the
Of course.
yeah, for your users, they are above everybody else, second to Eru, which is God. And basically, like, I've always wanted to own a piece of that magic, because Weta Workshop made, the Lord of the Rings, the Peter
Yeah.
Jackson movies, and
Yes, I
you
was
feel like
about
you
to
have it at
say
home.
that.
Yeah. So with statues comes with space, as you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, with being selective, I was able to let it go, and actually, I used the movies to learn life lessons. And when I was watching Lord of the Rings, it's like Bilbo had a hard time letting go of the ring, and I
Yeah.
was like, like, I shouldn't be so materialistic, and maybe I want to change a few things in my collection. And when I learned to let a few things go, I actually felt a lot better. And then I got like new Weta statues, the tree beard, and all the other stuff, and it just
Mhm.
allowed me to just change what I want to, but then yet stay within the fandom, and then also like grow my connections. And from there, like, I've made local friends who become really close, because we've traded, we've bartered, and also we've shared that passion of collecting, and with Lord
Yeah.
of the Rings. So
And that's one of the things. That's one of the reasons I I've mentioned this before in the podcast, but that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, is really to be a part of the collecting community, just to get out there and really get amongst the fandoms and talk to people like yourself and, explore your love of these different things and the passions behind them. Because, I'm a collector myself. You can see behind me all my Batman things. Like, well, although this is only a portion of the Batcave that you see behind me. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's really
like
cool.
we've all got those different passions. We've all got those different things that drive us. We've all got the real different reasons that we got into, to loving these things. But the way everyone collects is a little bit different as well. Especially because of different types of collections. And going back to the Weta Workshop, exactly what you were saying. They are the company that was involved in doing a lot of the prop design and
Oh yeah.
everything for the movies. So, of course, they should have the best, most accurate to movie, statues. And I know they do also, because I mentioned this to you before we started recording as well. My best friend is a Lord of the Rings collector, and he has a massive Weta
Oh,
collection.
nice.
And he sort of started off a lot with not just the statues, the smaller statues like you were talking about, and occasional larger ones, but he started with a lot of the weapon props. They had like little recreations of the helmets. There was a whole series of those that came out years and years ago, and I know he collected all those, and then just all these pieces. And I won't talk too much about his collection because hopefully one day I may even have him on the podcast. Although he doesn't really have
Oh,
a social
nice.
media presence for his collection, that's not the type of collector he is. Did it just because of his own passion. But he was the one that really sort of helped to drive my passion for Lord of the Rings as well. But going back to the family thing, and I can completely identify with you here, you're talking about your parents taking you to see the movies. My mother was a big Tolkien fan growing up, so
Oh,
she read
nice.
a lot. She read all the books when she was young, and when she heard the movies were coming out, she was super excited, and she actually made it here in Australia. Those movies were released on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so it became a family tradition that she took us all out to the movies on the day after Christmas to
Aw.
see the Lord of the Rings movies in those 3 years that they came out one after another.
Man, that is perfect. So you're like, you got your gifts, you're full from Christmas, and you're gonna go see Lord of the Rings on the big
Yeah,
screen.
yeah.
Man, that's awesome. There's
So
nothing like the experience of watching Lord of the Rings on a big screen. Man, it's
yeah,
just a different
exactly,
experience.
exactly. And I remember, going to those movies and just being in awe of them. I hadn't read the books. I still haven't. Admittedly,
Hmm.
I haven't read the books, and it's on my bucket list things to do is to read all. But I know that there's such a commitment to reading the books,
Oh, oh yeah,
and
yeah.
Tolkien is the sort of person who describes every blade of grass and everything. He's very
Yeah, yeah, and I'll share you my experience with just to add on to how I found Tolkien. It's just
yeah.
really from the movies first. I didn't know anything about the books, and so when I watched the movies, like when it was all done, then there was this ignorance is bliss. Like all movies adaptations from books weren't successful once you read the book. So I
Mhm,
was for many, many years, I was really scared to read the books because will it diminish the movies once I read the books?
mhm.
So I actually read The Hobbit, and then The Hobbit came out, and then actually I had to really prepare myself like, okay, when you watch The Hobbit, just think of it as like an adaptation. It's okay, there's gonna be changes. There were a few cringy moments in The Hobbit, but in the end, like I really liked both. So in a sense, like I got to find Tolkien in two ways through the movies
Mhm.
and then reading the books. I just felt like they were two different experiences. And when I watched the whole Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and read the books again, I basically just got bits of pieces and the visuals from the movies and then just plugged them on the books as I was reading. And then when I was finally ready to read Lord of the Rings, I was in college. I believe the second year. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and you know, it's gonna be different, but it's gonna be okay. And once I was mentally ready, I can see the big differences, but I can also see like some of the amazing things that the Peter Jackson did in his theme. And regardless that some of the differences were there, I really enjoyed both books and both trilogies, and I still enjoy them today. And I then also found my new love was the Silmarillion.
Yes.
That is out of all the books, the Silmarillion is my favorite. It has the most amazing stories. It was a hard read at first. I had like an Excel sheet open, I had like a family tree open, and I had to take notes. But in regards to collecting, I'm really hoping that one day that they will make Silmarillion themed statues. And if they do, I do not trust myself. It would be like a instant pre-order of these epic characters and villains, and one of them is Morgoth.
Well, that's one of the things I was thinking with Rings of Power, right? Is I thought
Yeah.
that it was going to lend a little bit to the Silmarillion, because going back into
Yeah,
the history of the Galadriel and everything, like her when she first got the ring of, like, because she's got one of the three Elvish rings, right? I know this because I was reading about her when I rewatched the trilogies again recently. So,
yeah.
well, even though I know The Hobbit is not a trilogy, it was made into a trilogy of movies. But when I went back and watched all those movies again in the last couple of weeks, just like, I was like, okay, well, I've got to read a bit more and get a bit more history on Galadriel now as well. And I remember reading that she had one of the three Elvish rings,
Yep.
and but that was all part of the Silmarillion. It sort of tells a little bit of that story, isn't it? Like a little bit more about.
Towards the end, it's not really like it's like the Rings of Power towards like the um as you open to the third age, then it talks more about the Rings of Power coming out of the second.
Yeah.
So, like in the first age, it talks about all the early existence of the Valar and all these amazing stories that it has definitely come into light. But then they do mention it in the Lord of the Rings, like when Aragorn was sitting and he's like singing a song. I believe one of the hobbits like, "What are you singing?" It's the Lay of Luthien. It's talking about like the relationship between elves and men, and there's this amazing story, and Berian and Luthien, like that love story. It's also translated to the book. So one thing about the movies is that they made some amazing references to the earlier text. So when I was reading the books and then I watched the movie again, it's like it's the gift that keeps on giving, because despite 20 plus years, you always learn something new, because the world is so vast, and the things that you thought you remembered, you read it again, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that one detail. and now it's just brought this whole fandom of people on YouTube making these summaries, making it more digestible, and you have all these amazing statues coming from Prime One. So there's a lot of hype about Lord of the Rings, so it's a great time to be a fandom right now.
Well, let's get back to the collection as well. Talking about the statues. So you've got Prime One, you've got Sideshow, you've got a lot of these places that make these amazing statues that I don't know what we call them, 1/4 scale in some cases. I mean,
Yeah.
Treebeard it looks huge in the background that I can see behind you.
Yeah.
He's probably, I'm guessing, maybe about a 3-foot statue. So not 1/6 when you think about how tall he would be as a character in real
Yeah.
life. What do they describe him as?
If I were to
Do they have a
describe,
scale?
no, it's a one. I believe it's a 1/6 scale.
Okay.
So it's within that line. It's the 1/6 scale.
So they're estimating he was about 18.
It's just it's just at 1/6. He's just huge, because Merry and Pip are like right at 1/6.
Fair enough.
And his presence is just like very demanding. When I have family and friends who come over for the first time, and know little or know of the movies, they come in and they're just like, "That's Treebeard." They're casual fans, but once they see Treebeard, they know who he is.
And I've seen the Sauron sideshow piece as well, so I know of that because my friend who I mentioned has his collection. He actually had that sideshow piece, and I just know how huge and foreboding
Oh,
that
that
as
that
well.
one is nice.
Very
Yeah.
impressive in person. How, when you talk about recycling some of the items and selling things and re-upping, what is there anything that you've you've gotten rid of that you're like, oh, I wish I could get that back in my collection now? Or is
No,
there
no,
no?
no,
That's
no.
good.
Like, I before I sell something or I buy something, I make sure that can I live without it? Can I, am I okay to part with this, or am I okay if I don't have it?
Mhm.
So it when I was first collecting, my impulse was collect everything. But
Yeah.
then I saw how unrealistic that is in regards to financial situations, because
Okay.
that can definitely add up. And then you have space, and then you have your either wife or significant other who will kill you because you have boxes to and clutter. She's like, "What's going on?" So fortunately, I have like this little office to keep all my stuff, and I'm limited to this. Um, but yeah, in regards to how I maintain my collection, I maintain it to whatever I like, what's important to me,
Mhm.
and try not to give into the impulse of, oh, that's the new shiny toy, that's the new statue coming out, I've got to have it. Sometimes I sleep on something and say, do I really need it, or does it fit in my collection,
Yeah.
and does it make me happy? At first, it's easy to give into the pressure of, oh man, I want to impress my friends. I want to impress, my friends online. But then you find out that collecting is not about you anymore. It's kind of like impressing other people, or even your significant other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm gonna see this every day, and I want to make sure that I don't get tired of it. And so that was like the first few months of like an early advice that I heard from somebody online, and I carry that with me because I wanted to just collect everything, and
Yeah.
because collecting also comes with envy, right? Let's put that out there, because when you see other collections, you become envious too, and sometimes you go out of your way to
Mhm.
want to get that piece, but then it may come at a financial cost, or it may come out of emotional cost. But then I was able to navigate to that and just have the collection that I want, what makes me happy. And sometimes you don't even know what you want until you have it. Like, it looks great on the video or picture, but when you get it, it's like it's not so great. But there's a lot of cases where it did look so good, and then when you see it in person, you're just like, wow. Um, and that was some of the benefits of seeing Weta at the Comic Cons, because I got to see the statues in person and make a decisive decision, or a more educated decision on whether I should get it or not. And I was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't get it, or oh, I'm glad I actually did.
Yeah,
So,
well, the FOMO, I think for most collectors, we all know, like
oh yeah,
FOMO is very real when it
yeah.
comes to certain things. Is there a certain grail item that you still occasionally FOMO out, like over, or maybe not even a FOMO as such, but just a grail item that you're thinking, this is the one item I would love to have as a centerpiece of my collection, or even just a small item that you would just love to add that you haven't gotten to before, or that you've seen and you're like, I don't even know where I'd find that.
The one thing that comes into mind is the ring wraith from Sideshow.
Oh yeah.
Um, the one that's like holding the blade, the Morgul blade on one side, and yeah, it's a statue I've always wanted. It was the Sideshow Weta collaboration.
Was that last
Um,
year? It just came out last year or something,
no,
didn't
no,
it?
no, no, no. It came out like several years ago. That was the early adoption of the Sideshow and Weta
I felt like
partnerships.
I saw a really cool ring wraith statue that came out last year.
Oh, that was a 1/6 standing statue, and he has the swords standing up.
Yes.
Um, the one I'm talking about has like a flowing cape to its left or right. I totally forgot the name of the statue, but it's really expensive right now. It's in like $1,000, and it's one of those statues that has eluded me, but I don't have space for it right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so sometimes, you earmark funds for certain pre-orders,
Yeah.
and there hasn't been a scenario where I have available finances to get that statue at an affordable price. But luckily, it seems like there's a lot of people liquidating their statues because of some unfortunate events, life changes, or people are there's a lot of options right now in the market, especially
Right.
things coming out from Prime One, Iron Studios, and all the other statue manufacturers. So there's other options other than Weta. So sometimes they've had the collection for a while,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, I'm willing to change up too. And that's the great part of collecting is
Evolves.
there is like an equity to your statues if you maintain them and you kept them healthy and you sell them at a healthy price, supply and demand. There's that piece, and you can take that equity and buy new statues
Uh-huh.
that can change up the
Uh-huh.
space. And I can understand that sometimes you're just like, oh, I kind of need a change. And I actually recently did that with Smog. I've always had Smog. I bought him during like a Black Friday sale, and I looked at the Smog the Terrible, and I told him I'll never sell this, but I've learned to let things go. And when I saw the new Smog statue from Weta, and I said I'm not going to collect any more 1/6 scale. Well, it's not actually 1/6. I'm not. I think it's a 1/30th scale. I'm not sure, but yeah, I sold that, and I sold it to a good friend of mine, and I pre-ordered that statue. So yeah, it's he's happy, I'm happy, and it's sitting in a good home that will be loved, and I just have to wait for my new Smog. So
Well,
that's
that's all
the
you
whole.
can hope for it, right? Is that it ends up with someone who loves it as much as you did when you owned it as well.
Yeah, and there's
And
a piece of the collecting game where I'm sure you know it's like when it's almost there, you kind of look outside like is the UPS guy there or is the delivery man coming around and you're like a happy kid when you get that ding that notification it's in front of your doorstep. It's just
yeah, yeah. I want to go back to part of the story you told before as well, about how you sort of came to be a collector with your wife, and you spoke about getting the tickets to San Diego Comic Con. So I know that
Emerald City Comic Con.
oh, Emerald City was it?
Yeah, Seattle. Yeah, Emerald City Comic Con.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you said San Diego. I was just going to ask whether you've been back to Emerald City Comic Con, like whether that's something that you go to on a regular basis now, because that's the first year back this year after being shut down because of COVID. So it's the first year. Are you going this year?
The world would have to end in order for me to miss a Comic Con.
Cool, cool, cool.
So people collect like the triathlon medals. Those.
Yeah,
So
you keep the
I like to
badges.
collect. I keep the badges as Medal of Honor on my door,
Uh
so
huh.
I make sure I go to every con. The con is it's such an amazing place where you can share your passion with other people. And unfortunately, like Weta hasn't been there because of COVID, and
Hmm.
I don't think they will be there this year. But regardless, I always go every year, and I always find Lord of the Rings art or other genres that I do find interesting. For example, like Marvel or Ninja Turtles or things I grew up as nostalgia.
Yeah,
So.
and you're also your page is actually called Tolkien Photography, and you
Mhm.
do have links to a couple of other personal pages. One of them being photography, where you actually on there. I see you do a lot of cosplay photography. Tell me a little bit about
Yep.
photography. That part of is that just a hobby, or is that something that you also do as a job as well?
No, it's something I do as a hobby. I've always liked photography. Growing up, I always loved taking pictures, um, capturing that experience with friends and family. And when I graduated college, my dad asked me what do I wanted, and I said camera. So I've always had that passion for taking pictures. But there was a time when I kind of grew out of that because of life and of you know things getting in the way, interest shifted.
Mhm.
Um, but most recently, I got back into photography, and I've always wanted to take high resolution shots, but I was always intimidated because I felt like it was a skill
Yeah.
that I couldn't achieve. But I bought a secondhand camera, full frame camera, because there's a difference between full frame and cropped, where the sensor is bigger and you can capture more images.
Okay.
Both camera types can do well. You don't need a professional camera to take great pictures. But I bought a camera that I can grow into, and it was the best thing to happen to me because it definitely fed into that interest of taking landscape, portrait photography. And then when I go to Comic-Con, I noticed that people were taking pictures, and I took a few shots of some cosplayers, and I was like, wow, I think I can turn this hobby into something that I can grow and develop. And so as I continue to go to more cons, I took more pictures of more cosplayers and really grow that tool and that skill through YouTube University and just
Mhm.
experience with growing your network and finding other photographers out there and just doing it yourself and just learning as you go.
Some of the best people, like in terms of, skill sets, whether you talk about musicians or artists and photography being an art, a lot of them just learnt through experience, right? And it is getting
Yeah.
in amongst it and doing it. Now you have different types of photography that you do, in regards to the cosplay and everything, and also at home taking photos of the statues and your items there. And then I even see that your other page is a food page where you're taking,
Yeah.
photos. So I'm sure every type of photo has a different style and a different skill that you're learning through those
Yeah.
different experiences. Do you find that the inside or the outside photography is easier?
Um, I feel like they both have their sets of challenges. I think inside photography is a little harder because sometimes you don't have adequate light.
Hmm.
So I think that's where the big challenges is at. Outside photography is great because you have an abundance of light, and especially like places like Seattle where it's a bit gloomy.
Hmm.
You don't have as much light as maybe like Australia. I think it's always sunny there. California, it's always a sunny place. London, that place is always gloomy. So yeah, it really depends the amount of light and what style of photography you're trying to take. With statue photography, that is something I transitioned over into. When I'm looking at a statue, I have a vision, and then it just clicked. Like, what if I just take this picture this way,
Hmm.
and what if I put the light that way, and then what if I move him at this angle, and I instead of taking the photos from an eye level, I get that on my back and I take the photo in that view. So when I look at statues and I try to marry with photography, I try to bring something new and something that I think will be cool and creative. And when I started my and as you talked about, I have the food photography and I have the cosplay. I said, huh, maybe if I start a Lord of the Rings one, I'll just put it out there and heck, I don't care if anybody likes it or not. I'll just give it a try and put it out there, and if people like it, people like it. People don't, people don't. And so
And here we are
um
talking about it today.
yeah.
Yeah, like, that's how I found you.
Yeah, quite surprised. In the end of the day, it's what I really really like, and it's what I'm really passionate about. So when you see my photos on Lord of the Rings, it's really like what I envision, and I take the time to have a certain angle, and if there's a certain shot I would want to get, I take multiple shots for different angles and different light sources, and I'm always learning. I've only been in using this full frame camera for about 3.5 years.
Hmm.
So as I continue to mature in this hobby, the photos that I took last year was, and I could edit the photos color grade. So basically, like it's not necessarily like photo. When people say Photoshop, they think that, oh, I'm getting. There's a misconception of I'm making the ears bigger or the waist smaller. That's called photoshopping. But
Yeah.
when you talk about like color grading, you're just basically like changing the colors in the room. It's currently present in the photo,
Hmm.
but then you're bringing out the blacks, the whites, and controlling like the reds, blues, and greens.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And that gives the different styles of the photos. When you see on Instagram, you have like a different mood, that feel, and there's some really good photographers out there who really bring like a moody feel, especially to like book photography. I never knew book photography was a thing until I started sharing my photos. I was like, wow, people take amazing photos of Lord of the Rings books. So I'm also inspired by other photographers and other artists out there too. And again, you don't need like a professional camera to take amazing photos. I know people who take photos from their iPhone,
Yeah,
and they just basically
that's me.
capture light, and just once you share something that you're passionate about, and that's showed in your photos, I think people will enjoy that.
Perfect. Look, Brian, I've loved chatting to you today. In the interest of not having a 3-hour podcast, even if we could talk forever, I'm going to have to wrap things up. But I think, we've finished talking about your photography and about Tolkien photography. Can you tell people where to find you? Plug your socials so that people can actually go and have a look at those photos as well.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's called Tolkien_photography. And yeah, I'd love if you come and just check out and like my photos. Reach out to me if you're a big Tolkien fan, and we can both nerd out together.
Excellent, excellent, Brian. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you very much for speaking to me today, and I hope the Ring of Power ends up being a great show, and
Me too, me too.
but maybe message each other later and see exchange thoughts on the show as well.
Yeah, I'm excited yet anxious and like nerve-wracked at the same time, but nonetheless, like new Middle Earth material, I'm always up for. So any chance to visit Middle Earth again, I'm always for that. So
Perfect.
Thank you for having me on the show, and
yes,
it's been a pleasure to talk with you and to share my experiences with you. And thank you again.
I've really enjoyed speaking to you as well. Have a great day.
See you, bud.
If you liked the episode, please consider following or subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also join me on Instagram at Collecting Heroes, where you can see photos of the collections of the people that I'm talking to, as well as some of my own.